So here's where I pitch on Mr. Tucker to start a library. And this is my first donation to the library. This is a document published by the Portland Cement Association 50 years ago. I have this version, and it gets updated. Miss Wilson is the editor at the moment. She shares it with another guy, and for some reason it kind of got larger, but it'd be a very good resource for even superintendents. It'd be a good resource for you to have, maybe share, maybe even John, look at your senior guys getting it. That's an old version, John, not the current version. If you want, we can get Miss Wilson to sign it for you.
Concrete celebrity.
Well, she wrote the notes, different people to come help her on that, and so I get complimentary copies. Mr. Tucker, here's another one. We'll get into this a little bit later, but here's another.
Thank you.
It's the PCA has got a design manual on pavements, and one of you PMs might really get excited about that. Give me a call, we'll talk it through. But it's kind of interesting when you dig into that. But start building a library like I've got here, so that you don't need to buy 50 copies of the CRSI.
Green.
Well, you guys got the newer ones. That's the 70s version.
In the 80s, it was $400.
Yeah, that's why I have my 70s version. But you start building this. ASTM tests. I've got ACI used to, they don't do it now, you can't buy this one anymore, but every spec, every ASTM test that's in the 301 spec was in this book. Now they've all been updated. Now you have to go to ASTM and buy the ASTM, or somehow try to weasel your way into it. The problem I don't like is, for example, ACI is not following, is telling now in 301, it's going to say you have to go to the ASTM to get answers. And so that forces the contractor, or in this case, you can go to the ready mix guy and go tell Will Squires, give me my copy so I make sure you're designing it properly. But the ASTM has changed on C94. For example, it used to be in the specs that say 300 revolutions. You can't exceed that with the ready mix truck. Now it leaves that decision up to the ready mix supplier to tell us how many revolutions. A lot of those rules have changed, and so the specs have changed, and we got to understand it as well. Here's another document to have, which is pretty neat. And some engineers will refer to this, but it's a book on how to detail rebar, and there's a checklist for the engineer to follow and refer to it. You know, he can put his notes or his details. He can buy these details from ACI and cut and paste them. And here's a set of notes of what he needs to do if he's going to use those. And then it's supported by technical papers that talk about how to use those details. So this one's pretty neat to have. So anyway, what we have on time?
11:10.
Jeepers creepers.
It's a good time to go somewhere.
So this is about the civil drawings. Civil engineers under a different set of rules. The 318 code doesn't apply, technically it doesn't apply to slab on grade. Because slab on grade may or may not transfer load and be a structural element. But for example, in tilt wall, you'll transfer the wind load from the tilt wall and use the slab on grade. Well, then technically the slab on grade is structural. ACI 301 has changed its name. In 16, it's called Specifications for Structural Concrete. And structural concrete has to transmit the load. And so now we changed our name. It's Specifications for Concrete Construction, so that we don't get into this technical chase. But in the case of the civil engineer, he's not following the IBC. The City of Bryan and City of College Station, a lot of cities do this. They get together and they publish a set of standards, a set of specs. So on the civil work that's related to city streets, there's standards and specs. That bleeds into our paving, onto our job site. Sometimes our private paving, the civil engineer who does a lot of street design will refer to those documents. The problem with the college BCS spec is it doesn't define tolerances. It says to follow the industry standard. Well, what's that? Let's declare we're going to follow 117. Let's tell them what standards, There's other issues about how we're going to accept the concrete. We'll get into that in a minute. But that civil engineer designs from a different aspect. He's going, this book, back in the 50s, AASHTO, the federal government paid for full-blown tests on pavement. They had semi-trucks driving on pavement for years to analyze that performance and generate a design criteria that takes into account the service life, the cracking, the fatigue, the subgrade, the K values of the subgrade. And then PCA published that in the 80s in this document that's now in your library. I got to make sure I'm giving you the clean one. You can thank Mark for that. They also use TxDOT standards and stuff. They'll use what's referred to in the standards with the cities. And then what's really neat is there's a website called pavementdesigner.org. And so this manual method that uses a bunch of graphs and goofy charts that 50 years ago we used all the time. But tables that you got to manually fill out and use little things and straight edges, by today's standard. Well, this is all software based. So one of you guys, after hours, I'm not going to advertise to Mr. Tucker but you can download that for free and have access. The advantage of that is it gives you can, if you get in trouble on some paving, you can go back and look and see if you're going to be okay. We referenced some paving that we were involved with on a lawsuit. You go back and read 2020 with the actual strength and the actual information that as it was built and the actual test results shows that pavement will last for 50 years. Not 20, 50. So that it's a great tool. But all these documents, and I got to pull out my copy. It's tabbed. But all these documents have some issues because here the engineer has some design values and factors of safety built into the design. And in this document, they didn't do that. And so they come up with that the concrete will have a minimum thickness. It has, minimum means what? Minimum means minimum. So minimum means if they design it to be 7-inch concrete, can you do 6 7/8? No. Minimum means minimum.
Is that for 100% of the slab, or is it?
It says minimum. We'll get into this in a minute. The other, on thickness, the other is, the other tab is minimum strength. So they're gonna want 3,500 pound concrete. Do they want 34.99?
No.
No. They want minimum. But Jeremy, being the enterprising guy he is, he said, hey, we're gonna follow ACI 117, and guess what? 117 says that you can be -3/4 for one spot, and the average of all your tests can be a -3/8 and still be acceptable. So by Jeremy referring in the proposal, we're following that. It then generates a tolerance on this number. This civil engineer that designed it, that used this, he's got other assumptions in here so that he'll say that there is a tolerance there. Things aren't absolute, a negative tolerance.
Jim, a lot of this is coming from, like you mentioned a couple of weeks ago, lawsuits. And so I guess the focus of this is not only constructability, but protection.
Legal protection for the firm, but also too, it makes a leveling playing field. So that when these guys are in the field building something, they know what the rules are. And that you don't end up in this argument over something. The only time you'll get into an argument over this is in a lawsuit. And when you're getting played. And you want to avoid that. So you're always going to want to say, I'm following ACI 117, and I'm going to follow ACI 301. Because the other part, 301, we'll get into it, hopefully we don't run out of time. 301 gives you the statistical method of analyzing the strength results. So that if we have a low break, as long as that low break is greater than 500 psi minus F prime C, in this case 3,500, we're allowed to go down to 3,000 with one test. But then we have to average that one test with the 2 in front and the 2 following and the 2 in the middle, and those 3 averages all have to exceed, be greater than the 3,500. So that the concrete material itself, you need to refer to 301 to define the acceptance. Because that's not in these documents that he's using, this software he's using or she's using, says minimum strength, minimum thickness. But your ready mix guy, he's not providing 3,500 pound concrete, he's following 301. And 301 so you're already providing 4,200 pound mix design. Take advantage of that. Section 4, we could get into it, talks about the over design of the 3,500. And then section 166, which we might get to today, talks about how to analyze this. We good?
Yeah.
So here's some notes from the civil engineer. And again, he's got, concrete shall have a minimum 28-day compressive strength of 4,000. And then he gets in transportation and placement in accordance with 301. And what he's referring to there, transportation and placement, is the chapter 4, some of chapter 5, some of chapter 4, and so that he's defining the specification that way. But we're going to always want to follow 301. He does get in some other things. He's got a minimum splice length of 30 bar diameters, so that as superintendents, we need to be reading this stuff, because there could be a gotcha. Because this doesn't say that you could be 28 bar diameters. The 117's tolerances, though, gives you a tolerance for that splice length. That's part of why we want to refer to 117, because it covers more than just concrete material. It covers the rebar, the subgrade, the thickness, this test method that I talked about here. There's a lot of things in 117 that protects us. They don't talk about how to test the concrete here for thickness, but it's covered here. They don't talk about F numbers. F numbers are covered here. F numbers aren't covered here. How you'll test is covered in here. Again, it's written for the contractor, that's written for the designer. A lot of times I'll see the minimum thickness, they'll call minimum slab thickness. If they're really being correct, this should read minimum slab thickness 5, 6, and 7. But this engineer, maybe on purpose, maybe not, didn't do that. Minimum strength. I had another project, Jeremy, that you gave me. They had a minimum 3,500 pounds at 28 days. We talked about that. The other thing I saw on that same project is they referenced the geotech report. Have I talked about the geotech report?
No.
We go from here to here to here. Is there a geotech report in there? No. He says right here, hey, wait a minute. I'm telling you certain design things, but the geotech mixed design will be overridden by the geotech report. Well, the geotech report is a report that's written for the design professional, for the structural engineer, for the civil engineer. For the civil engineer, the geotech will take that software and he'll run through, calculate his K values of the subgrade, figure out how much lime he needs in there, get information from the owner on the truck sequence and how many trucks, or if it's just cars. A Home Depot will have certain thickness out in the cars, and then really some real heavy duty stuff in their delivery areas, and the geotech will design those different things. I've seen the civil engineer turn around and not follow those recommendations. Maybe he goes thicker, maybe he goes thinner, maybe the geotech had a 4 and a 7, but the engineer went and did a 6. That's certainly up to the civil engineer to do that. But please make the statement, and I put it here at the bottom, Jeremy, that the geotech is so subjective. It is not written in mandatory language. It's totally subjective. But the Tucker proposal is, the geotech report is for information only.
So, question on that. So John made a mention about piles a while ago and testing for that. What came up recently on 2 jobs was we asked whether we needed to test the test pile too, and they all said reference to geotech, but the geotech said twice the live load or whatever the design load is what it said. And so basically they were telling us to go to the geotech to determine that. Is that something we can push back on, or?
No, he would be the expert. He would be the engineer of record for that, and that's proper. Are we talking AutoCAD?
Yes, AutoCAD files.
So ACI doesn't cover AutoCAD. So you've got, and I almost brought it, AutoCAD has got their own group, and they've got an AutoCAD manual, and you really need to get a copy of that manual. Mine's probably outdated. I got my manual when I did GCon in 2010, 2011. I can bring it next time.
We've got a copy of it. I've got a copy.
But that manual, you want to tie that you're using that manual, because
The
I have
purpose
never-
of that would be that the geotech is informational, but the architect and its team needs to provide what load they want us to test to.
Right.
That was an important part of that. Yes, the document, the information's there, but you as a design team need to tell us what to test the pier to.
Right.
And that's eventually what we got them to do.
Eventually, but it was,
Yeah.
I had to tell them what to tell me.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of times where the geotech report and the civil or the structural do not jive.
They don't match.
Do not agree.
Yeah, it's recommendations is all the geotech is. Yeah.
That's the word. The geotech is recommendations. But a lot of times, I've seen the notes on the structural drawings. Hey, you will comply with the geotech report for the subgrade preparation. Well, the geotech report might talk about, hey, I want to moisture condition all of it. I want to chemically condition all of it. I want to, you can put a 2-foot cap and moisture condition 6 foot, or, they got, or lime stabilized in lieu of all that. There's 4 options, and which one are we supposed to do?
Yeah.
And it's up to the engineer of record to determine which one to do. And maybe he says, hey, Jeremy, I want you to price these 2 methods and let's see which one works better. That's a different animal. But when they comply with the geotech, jeepers creepers, that's dangerous.
So in a court of law, the geotech's not a governing document. Is that the way it's viewed?
Well,
Or can it be depending
But
on how it's?
they're generating a report for the civil and structural engineer to utilize. You'll see some structural engineers will say, hey, I'm on my piers, I'm using such and such skin friction, such and such end bearing per the geotech report provided by Terracon, dated yak, yak, yak. And that's the right way it should be done.
So it feels like to me lately what's happening more and more is that we're getting tasked with having to figure out what we're supposed to do, and then we tell them, hey, this is what we're gonna do, and get their approval. Because it feels like from the engineering standpoint, they're getting a little lazy. And so would you recommend not even giving them that information? Like, or tell them, no, you need to tell me what we're doing because you're the engineer.
So we're gonna take a rabbit trail.
Okay.
So in our industry, what has happened is a lot of things. It has become so complicated that not everybody knows everything. And we've got these niches and silos, and so we'll stay in our silos. And then you've got the legal stuff of not making assumptions and exposing yourself, so that structural engineers have to interpret stuff. But they're also, at the same time, we're cutting everybody's pay. We're reducing fees and shopping the numbers for design professionals. It's against the law, but there's ways to do that. And so that everybody feels that pressure, and because of that pressure, their documents aren't as good as they used to be. Their skill level, technical knowledge is not where I did this whole thing that we talked about before on ACI documents. I didn't go through the whole gambit because I was talking to the American Society of Civil Engineers and DFW. And I said, here's how the ACI reports work and how you should use them. Because most engineers don't do it. We're not even started on talking about how to use this. We'll get into that some other time. But there's a lot of things that an engineer has to do to use that document. But
And the schedule's compressed.
And plus the schedule's compressed. One of the things, when I took my second position with that hospital firm, they were design build, and I got exposed to that wonderful life. And at Beck, Peter Beck bought a design firm and was put together a design. And what we had with Brian Jones and the group out of Austin, those designers, that was awesome. And I could call Brian and get an answer. Teaming is really important. I remember doing the science building in Waco, and I'm up. It's 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm on the phone to the structural engineer, and I explained, hey, I've screwed up. I made this mistake, and I didn't put the construction joint. I didn't put the right valves in. Can you explore that? I don't hear from him for almost a whole day, and I'm like this, man. As he studied my problem, he figured out he made a problem, and he had a design problem that he spent the rest of the day fixing, and said, here's what you need to do with yours, and here's what you need to do. And together, we worked on that. Was there a change order or anything? No,
But your specific question, it points to liability too. You know, we've always kind of taken the approach that if we are teaming up with a contractor and the design team as a subcontractor, what's the approach for information? You know, it's like, do we suggest, are we liable if we take these different pieces and try to put it together and say, this is how we see it, do you concur? You know, sometimes that gets the ball moving a little bit faster than just like, we need this information. Yeah.
I got engaged in January to help with an anchor bolt layout. They poured a mat slab, and the anchor bolts were wrong, and by the time that problem got verbally transmitted to the GC, a young lady that probably didn't have a lot of experience, she generated an RFI. The structural engineer probably didn't have a lot of experience, and she generated an answer to what she heard that was written, and 6 weeks go by. And in the meantime, steel's coming and all this, and it was just jackhammer out concrete, so they hired me, and I spent a day and put together an RFI and said, made recommendations. I actually measured all, did the work that should have happened for the RFI, gave them suggestions, but I didn't specify what to use for an anchor bolt replacement or what epoxy to use. I left, hey, you guys, please provide this information. And they went back with Hilti, I guess HT or whatever, 250 or that system, which protected them because they could buy that system. But that system had problems with it because the bolts were too close together. So you had to solve that too. So
I guess that's why I'm asking, because like 10, 15 years ago, you would have just asked the question and said, this is the problem, how do I solve it, you tell me. You would never have said, I'm gonna propose doing this and this and this, is this okay? Because everyone's assumption was that you were bearing some of the responsibility or liability for that solution, right? But I mean, ultimately, if you're getting there okay, it's all right. But
you structure your RFI strategically, give them the facts, and document. Hey, we all screw up. You got a discrepancy. Hey, just explain it, and you'll develop a positive relationship. Now, you might have an adversarial relationship, maybe with the GC or with the engineer, and then your approach needs to be a little different. But I've always been of the school to help guide them so I get the answer I want. I don't want to jackhammer out all this concrete. I want a core and epoxy. Hey, I screwed up. I want a core and epoxy to fix it like we've done a million times. And then they went to the engineer record, and they should have, as a pre-engineered metal building, they should have gone to the pre-engineered metal building designer. And guess what? When I told them to go to that person said, oh yeah, here's. Because who had responsibility for the anchor bolt? It wasn't the engineer record, it was the pre-engineered. You gotta figure out who's responsible, just like here. We gotta figure out who's responsible. You guys for the first time and starting to understand how all this flows around. It'll help you understand where responsibility lies. So let's take a breath. Where we at on time, Mr. Tucker?
11:36.
So I got 24 minutes. Jeremy, was that late?
Does anybody want a water? Anybody need a water, a Coke, one water, two water?
Jody wants a beer.
Just two waters?
All right.
I heard about Kobe earlier, I'm still waiting on that.
You gave me extremely prescriptive, telling us not what the result is, but telling us how to do it, which we really don't like. In 301, we try to be performance-based, where we're asking you for the result. We're not telling you how to get us there, because you're gonna slump. In 301, slump is determined by the contractor, not the engineer of record. We're not smoking crack. The guy that actually made that motion to change this document, in the 2010 version, the designer specifies the slump. In 16, and Mark said, hey, slab on grade concrete. I'm not gonna tell you 4 inches plus or minus an inch, because what happens, if you're using a straight edge, you want that concrete to be 5.5.
Right, can you say that again? So the engineer,
So the engineer,
301 says the contractor is responsible for that?
301 says the contractor determines the spec.
Yeah, that's a bit
But not if you're working in Plano.
Does
because
everybody
they're
else
not
know
going by
that?
the spec.
In the industry?
Yeah, but hey, I'm following, he's gonna look on one structural drawing and say, okay, I'm following 16, or I'm following 20. And in that, there's language that says, because if you're doing concrete with a straight edge, you're at 5.5. You agree?
Yeah.
What happens if you got laser screed? What do you have?
Well, he had to do much laser screed work.
So 4 inches.
Yeah, 3 or
4
4 and a half.
inches. If you're doing slip form, paving slip form, you're at 2 or 3. Well, and Mark said, I don't know which way you're gonna put it. So it's up to you to tell me. It's up to you to get your mix design to match how you're doing it. Can we provide concrete and do a 4-inch slump? Yeah, it's gonna be pretty cheap concrete, but to get to 6.5, we gotta maybe use a mid-range to get there. Or we just ask $3 to $5, beat up Jimmy and get a better price. But you gotta pay a little more to get that higher slump.
We did that recently.
Yeah, we're doing it all the
They
time.
called for a 4 slump. It was summertime. We knew we couldn't pour it with a 4. You know, and we had to resubmit a 6.5 inch slump.
And what'll happen between the 4 and the 6.5 is you're gonna use a mid-range.
Yeah.
That's what we did.
But this reads that you determine what the slump is.
How can we get in front of that? Because we run into that every day on the job.
We learned this language well enough to be able to repeat it like that and to be able to tell them to back off.
Right.
That's why we're here.
Contractually, wonder if we could put something together.
Well, the specs are starting to say 301, since you mentioned that.
Yes.
And the projects you're on right now probably say 301.
Yeah, they do.
They also reference 318.
You see, a lot of, now,
We get return submittal all the time that says, hey, slumps out of range, or this, that, and that.
but you see, in the proposals, I've got another client that goes through the same shit you guys are going through. And he put in every proposal, we're following 301 and we're doing either 4 or 6.5. Or in the case of a column, he wants 7. You guys have a teaming with AFR. I did a project with another formwork guy in Fort Worth.
Talking about Aguilar.
They want everything at 7 inch. If I'm providing the concrete, they want 7 inch. They want a pour column, they don't want a bunch of honeycombs.
Yeah.
They don't wanna mess with it. summertime, they don't wanna screw around with hot weather.
Like this wall
It
we're
makes
gonna
sense
pour,
because
what
whenever
slump
you're
are
doing
they
curb
coming
gutter,
in?
you have
We
to
need to look at
change
it.
the slump
Yep.
with the paving right
Like
beside
us for a
it. Yeah.
You're, and you're gonna run it dry,
Correct.
and you're gonna pour the
That's
four,
it, probably
and then
costs
you're
for a
gonna
four
turn
plus
back,
line.
you're gonna add water, and you're
Yeah.
gonna start,
Yeah, 5 to 6, yeah.
So this is that case where we've talked about before about Tucker Construction taking more of a proactive approach in mix design and saying, hey, we're taking your specs, but these are our this is what we're saying. Cause it falls back on us, that's what you're saying, right? Or in ACI, it's performance based, right?
you can say,
So screw you,
In
you
the
say
case of
3-inch
slump-
slump, I need a 5.5 on this mix, that's what we're putting, you know.
you could put in your proposal, you could just put your own weasel words that say, Tucker Construction will supply the slump and provide the concrete mix design that complements that slump. That we are not following the slumps.
Written in the general.
Because
We will apply the slump to what we're doing.
if you just
You know,
submit
you-
something, they're gonna just kick it back, unless you.
Well, we need to provide the verbiage
Yeah.
on our submittals, like maybe
That's what I was
that
gonna
means
say,
something on
even-
our front covers.
I mean, yes, proposals for sure, but in addition to that, I think it has to go on our submittal package.
Like
Yeah.
just some templated language that says, hey, per ACI 301.
But it goes back further than that. When you guys are buying a
Yeah,
contract,
there
But it's
too.
gotta
but
be in
we're
our-
talking
You're
about-
talking to Martin Marietta. Martin Marietta is gonna give you, if you buy their plain Jane mix design, you buy the 3,500 for paving, it's gonna be 4-inch plus or
It
minus.
has to start at the bid level, and then it transfers all the way
But
through
then,
the super.
but then we also have to make sure that our proposal is incorporated in the contract we sign, and that, because
That
they might
language has
not,
to
they
be in
might
the
not
contract.
honor that proposal unless it's part of the contract that we sign, because they'll go, show me in there where that verbiage is. Well, it was on your proposal, but that's not part of the contract now.
Someday we'll get into the Martin Marietta mix design. And their weasel words that they have in there about hot water, about, they're not following, actually Martin Marietta is following 301, but the other guys in Dallas Fort Worth aren't. The Argos and those guys aren't following 301. They're gonna follow, they actually state that they're following proportions of 211 and some other things. But the head of QC for Martin Marietta sits on 301. And so Michael Wisenhunt is following that because he knows what's there. He knows that the proportions are covered. But if you go in their cover sheet on Martin Marietta, we'll do that someday.
Yeah.
That's a future agenda.
The state of the engineering pool that everybody's pulling from, and lower cost, faster timeline, not as much knowledge. We are going to be in a constant state of educating them to this, and that's what it's become.
Yeah.
Just get 301 on their safety bid.
I mean, we also get it on jobs where you have
Check out 301 for
a contractor telling you can't add a drop of water to a mix,
We'll get into that
to a
too.
truck, when it
Tell you
says
what,
you can
Joe,
add
we
20.
Forever template.
How many of the last two proposals we signed, they talked about water content?
this truck in there.
A lot of our more recent proposals, they put in their specs about, you can add water if you have the documentation to show that the mix design will allow for it at a ride.
And that's what our 2-add water is.
Yeah.
Some specs are saying now you can't add water after you add a mid-range water reducer, which is a strange deal.
Some say, I've read a few that said no water shall be added on site.
Yeah.
That's what he said.
Well, Aggie Park.
This and the change.
Aggie Park is
That chair, why just make sure that those things are old?
Big butt sitting there.
Cat fell through the seat the other day.
Did it?
So I got my weasel words here whenever I mess with somebody's spec. And you can't quite see the colors, but I use 3 colors. I use yellow, 4 colors. I use blue for information, but I use green for go, yellow for caution, and red for all stop. So as I go through this spec, And we'll try to run through there quick. So one of the first things I hit, section 1, there's a 3-part format. Section 1 is general, and it covers the general items, submittals. In this case, it's talking about the shrinkage test. As soon as, Jeremy, I see that word, this is all red. You don't see it, but this is all red, because the shrinkage stuff, especially when you see a huge paragraph like that,
Yeah, that's,
that's all smoke and mirror
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
All the smoke. That ASTM test C-157, you can't consistently repeat that test and get the same result. So, and Domingo Carrera, an engineer that did a lot of work and was on 301, but he explained that's the advantage of being active in ACI is you get a lot of background. So
we actually used a C-157 report that was from 2004 as our shrinkage test for the mix design we're using. So that's a sub spec.
So 2004.
Yeah, that's sub 3. Yeah.
2004 is 18 years ago. Are we using the same aggregate? Are we using the same?
They say they are.
Are we using the same sand?
We got it waived.
I gotta put $5 in. Are we using the same cement? We're not even using the same admixtures.
Yeah.
Source limitations. I think this has got a red, especially in today's world where there's such a demand for cement materials. You can't just say, I mean, Michael Wisdom, I referenced Michael. Michael told me it was a good time to not be a superintendent because he said, and he and I were talking last summer, he says, I would have called you this morning and said, oh, on your 400-yard pour, put a bulkhead at 100 because I didn't get my cement delivery. I can only give you 100 yards.
Yeah.
And we're in the middle of the pour.
Yeah.
I flagged, my colors there are 117 is yellow, 211 should be green because it's a guide, that's not a spec. 213 is a yellow, or 212 is a yellow. That's a guide, not a spec. 214 is a red because that's a guide as well, and I don't want to override 301. So Jeremy, in this case, I would literally exclude. We are not going to use guides, and we're not going to follow 214 specifically because we're following 301. Now there is a hot weather spec and there is a cold weather spec, but those subjects are also covered in 301, and that's redundancy. But he doesn't say that he's using the hot weather spec. He might be referring to the guides. So you could have in your proposal, Jeremy, just a statement that we are using the guides for information only, and we are using the specs 301 and 117 as our primary documents. Testing services. The spec is written for the contractor. This is telling the contractor what to do. The contractor does not hire the testing agency. That responsibility belongs to the owner. That is extremely important. Strategically, we have to play a game in here when we talk about testing, that we talk about the testing and say that it's to be engaged by the owner, and here's what recommendations are, and there is testing by the contractor. Sometimes you might have to do testing. So some words I picked up in red: exposed, exposed, smooth form concrete. You got, how can it be smooth formed if it's BB? BB is not smooth. It's a subjective term. 301, 2005 used the term smooth form, rough form. 2010, we got rid of those terms and went to the SF numbers to handle how to describe the texture of the concrete. The reason I highlighted the exposed was because what's exposed, later you'll see not unexposed, define those. Tell me where, is a mechanical room, is that exposed or unexposed? In this, we cover it with drywall that's not exposed, but in a mechanical room, it's only the maintenance guy, who cares? If it's a stairway, is that exposed? Sometimes they'll say public view.
Yeah,
you know.
a cooling tower.
Yeah. So the other is I highlighted in red, continuous, true, and smooth. Alex, can you pour concrete that's continuous, true, and smooth?
Oh, yeah, all day.
It's a subjective, and I'm gonna say, no, you can't.
Yeah. It depends on who's
You're
looking at it.
smooth,
Yeah, I
am
mean,
I wrong?
it's all perspective.
Yeah,
Right.
that's Bo Paradowski's definition of that and our definition of that are two different things.
301.
So we talked about unexposed. So sometimes you need to define some things. I'd like you to tell me who is a reputable manufacturer for void form. Why is that even in there? But at least they got you a void form spec.
Yeah.
It's so subjective.
But
Would they approve a shady manufacturer?
No, see.
well, none of them are reputable. It's pretty cutthroat. And I highlighted that, hey, they specified the Mox block and whoops, the protection board. That they did do some good things there. I don't wanna, then there's some, hey, we're using grade 75 rebar. Better check that out. That's pretty abnormal.
Yeah.
Then we're talking about plain welded wire fabric. So 301 and 117 does not put a tolerance on welded wire fabric. And the reason for that is that's the position we took, and then the welded wire fabric people went, oh shit, you can't do that. Nobody will ever use our product. Well, that was kind of the intent, because you poured concrete with people walking on a fabric on a sidewalk. Where's that wire mesh?
Well, when we do deck,
Accelerate.
when we do deck pours, they're wanting 3/4 at the top, you know, or,
3/4 from the top.
yeah, and you
So-
got a system laying on it.
So you gotta buy a bunch of number 4 bars to support the rebar, and then they'll do, you know, 6/6, W6, you know, it'll be really light, which means you step on it, you bend it, it's no longer where it belongs. But our solution was, you gotta be like W4 or better, so that it springs back, and but the engineer has to define what the tolerance is, because it's not in any of the documents. We really don't want to use welded wire fabric because we don't know where it's going to end up. Very early in my career, in the mid '80s, late '80s, I demoed a bunch of sidewalk that my firm had put in. A good superintendent had put, and all the mesh was in the sand.
Oh, yeah.
I flagged rebar, galvanized rebar. That's a bunch of money.
Yeah,
Are they serious about that?
We got that nicked before pre-bid, but yeah.
And then they're asking for stainless steel bar supports. That's another one.
Got that X'd.
So as I read through the specs, I'm looking for that stuff, and I'm sorry you can't see my color.
And they had
I know
stainless
where-
steel
What's that, Joe?
they had stainless steel wall ties too.
No, I love the green, yellow, red, you know.
Concept, yeah, that's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, that's, we do our debriefs, that's a great opportunity to that's how we should do our debriefs, ultimately.
And what the problem was is when I did my PDF I didn't print the whole spec, I only did these 28 pages. I didn't do it in color, so I apologize. But you can see silica fume, I did that as gray, or no, I did that as yellow, because can you guys even buy silica fume here?
We
No,
can, but it's
but
expensive.
bullshit spec. Can you provide any fine aggregate free of materials that are deleterious reactivity? I'm in a lawsuit right now where they didn't. I'm making some pretty good money on it. So here they talk maximum aggregate size. I flagged it as red for lightweight. You want the ready mix supplier to tell you what the largest aggregate size is on lightweight, because he has to get water into that aggregate. And if you use 1-inch material, you'll never get the water into the aggregate. When you start pumping it, you'll pump the water into the aggregate. So you got to use 5/8 graded material so that when he soaks that aggregate, he gets water into it and you'll be able to pump it. Okay. Back in the 80s, that cost the ready mix company get back into shrinkage. You have to talk to your ready mix guys and get them to tell you what the shrinkage values are. I had a structural engineer with HKS 20 years ago said, all I got to do is specify it and it'll happen. Well, yeah, you could specify it, and here's what that costs. Because what he specified was out of reach for the aggregates that we had in that marketplace.
Yeah.
The one nice thing they did is they had a good shrinkage admixture, but that costs money. Are you really going to do that? So again, they do have a nice spec in here about self-consolidated concrete. That's pretty expensive stuff too. If you got better techniques, you can accomplish the same thing. Sidebar, rabbit trail. In Committee 347 on formwork, we have no formulas for self-consolidated concrete, and we've been working for 20 some years, and every time we have a formula, we learn that it doesn't work. So that formula might work for that mix design, might work for that locale, but you go to another locale, a different mix design, it won't work. It won't be the same. And there's too many variables. And in Canada, they have spent significant money. Ellis Dawn, contractor in Canada, has come up with some formulas for their stuff. Some of the first self-consolidated I saw 20 years ago was used in Vancouver, Washington. It eliminated the finishers.
Wow.
You'd pour the slab.
Yeah.
I'm talking elevated. You pour the slab with no finisher. You'd have laborers, but no finishers, because it's like water, and it goes to one elevation.
Huh.
And they had other materials going on top, like wood
Yeah.
flooring,
Oh, okay.
so that if it had a rock or something sticking up, that they didn't care.
Okay.
So they eliminated all the finishers. So what's the man-hour factor for a finisher for elevated slab?
85 cents a square foot, roughly.
Well, does that include the
That's the
labor?
place and finish.
Place and finish.
You
Yeah.
still gotta pump it, you gotta
Yeah.
have a guy on the hose,
Yeah.
and you gotta have 2 guys would come along, kind of pushing it around a little bit. So you got 3 guys.
15, 20 cents probably, just to eliminate the guys on
So there's no trial machines, no late nights. Different way. Permeability admixture, another exotic thing. Corrosion inhibitor, another exotic thing. Are you using it on your job? A lot of times specs are written to cover everything in the world. Evaporation retarders, which one do you guys use? Eucabar. All right, everybody uses Eucabar. They do talk about bonding agents. These ones scare me a little bit. They're great products. I use Armatech on patching, but cheaper. That stuff's expensive, but that doesn't give me an alternative to do something else. And does that mean you got to bond? Every time I saw a 301, I tried to highlight it. Is it chow time?
Yeah.
I gotta shut up quick, cause I'm hungry. So, this spec actually used 301. Now this spec did something I don't like. They say fabricate and install using the CRS manual standard practice. That's this document here. I don't wanna use this document. I'm gonna follow, contractually, I wanna follow 301 and 117 because they are written properly. This is written in a friendly guide state of point. It's not a legal document. So I would, on my proposal, I'd probably qualify this, that was for information. Stuff there about, they're very prescriptive on mixing times. They do refer to 117, which is a good thing. And then they refer to 117, and then what do? They write all the damn tolerances. And so now somebody in your organization has got to stop, pull out 117, and go through all this, because sometimes they'll play gotcha and tilt wall in 117 is changing the tilt wall tolerances, but they're not published yet. And they're not recognized yet by everybody in the industry. Yet I'm aware of one design professional in Houston that changed all the manually changed the tolerances to the new requirements because somebody secretly gave it to them, which is a no-zo. But then don't flag it, and the tolerances are tighter than the norm. So whenever you see somebody quoting tolerances, take somebody needs to go through it. Jeremy, one of the PMs. Jody, can you prevent the loss of mortar through a form? It's, again, something that's just unreal. You won't find prevent in this document. Anything that's an absolute term won't be in there because you can't enforce it. I don't know what 237 is. I think they might have wanted to say 347, but I don't know what 237, that's a typo. There's prevent. Excuse me, static electricity. Temporary openings, they got all confused here. And when you read the formwork stuff, that it's ugly. And then they go on and they refer to AISC on the tolerances for anchor bolts and stuff. Use 117. You don't let them change the rules. Here you got to shoot the MOX block with stainless steel powdered fasteners. I wonder what that costs. And then once you wreck the formwork, you got to continue curing.
I missed that. I didn't see that at all.
The only time I had that I was forced to do that, I was forced to cure columns and shear walls and the underslide of a slab. They also specified sodium silicate, which was pretty cheap. And even though we told them what the deal was, they said do it anyway. Again, everybody's worried about liability. ACI 347 is a guide, it shouldn't be the reference. But they had some gotchas there. They write in this spec twice that you can't wreck until they measure the F numbers. And it's up, you gotta make, you lose control at that point. You need to put in the proposal, you will measure that same day that we pour, you will measure that afternoon. Again, comply with 301, but not these other formwork documents. They get into some stuff on reshoring that's hocus pocus. Again, you remove the shores. It says without excessive stress or deflection. When you remove shores, you want it to deflect, but I can't tell you what's excessive or not. It, again, subjective. I'm trying to hurry because I'm hungry. Again, tolerances, whenever you see tolerances in a spec, you better go to 117 and see why. Try to get to the bottom of the page, fellas. Oh, perfect. That's where I stopped. I didn't do the whole thing. But when I do a constructability review, I'll go through with the red, green, yellow, and I'll add notes that talk about what's there. I've done constructability reviews for different firms. I don't want to do that. Oh, Jimbo, you got out of, this is a good time to go eat.